This episode is sponsored by the IoT Job Site, the world's only dedicated space for applying for and advertising IoT vacancies across the world. Register now for job alerts or get in touch via let's talk at theiotjobsite.com.
Welcome to the IoT podcast show. I'm your host, Tom White. Today we are joined by Jonathan Williams. Jonathan is the product manager for wireless and IoT at Twilio. Jonathan, welcome to the IoT podcast show.
Yes, hi Tom. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Really looking forward to it.
Absolutely, same here. Been looking forward to learning more about Twilio and hopefully our listeners as well. Certainly making inroads in the industry, so it'd be great to get into that today. Just to kick things off, as we normally do, can you explain a little bit about your background, Jonathan, and what led you into this crazy, mad world of IoT?
Of course, yeah. So my background, well, I guess I started as a hardware and software engineer many moons ago, and then worked for CSR, a Bluetooth chip company initially, so in the software teams, running the software teams, and then kind of crossed over to the dark side of product management, where I ran a number of the sort of large audio chips that CSR made and are now the Qualcomm Bluetooth audio chips.
Okay, yeah.
From there, I went into a startup which did primarily video conferencing, where I kind of grew and ran a new business line within that video conferencing startup, which really had a sort of IoT focus to the meeting room. So we had a management portal and a back end managing meeting rooms globally for our customers, across their deployments, which is pretty exciting. And from there, I've kind of moved, back closer to the hardware, I guess, and into Twilio, where I look after the device builder platforms of Twilio.
Fantastic, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, great background in hardware, software. Know CSR, know Qualcomm quite well. So, I think that from a networking perspective has obviously led you on quite nicely into Twilio. Jumping straight into Twilio and a bit more about some of the products and the services that the company delivers. Could you talk a little bit about the Twilio customer engagement platform? And how that's being used to enhance IoT as we see it today?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, Twilio began really, all about customer engagement and bringing, communication to whether it's web applications or mobile applications, through the power of really simple APIs. So things like SMS connectivity or voice connectivity and all of those kind of things. So really, bringing an almost developer-first focus to that web development community to easily add things like connectivity into those applications. And since then, Twilio has obviously expanded into other types of connectivity and moved up the stack. So we now provide things like end-to-end contact center applications, and more recently, through the acquisition of Segment, who provide sort of intelligence and insight into the actual customer data that is going over some of those channels. Then it really is all about the kind of the voice of the customer and bringing all of those disparate comms mediums together. And I think for Twilio IoT, which is almost a separate business within Twilio, there are almost huge parallels between what we're doing now in IoT and that early Twilio journey. So we're really looking to bring the sort of complexity of the secure connectivity, between IoT devices and the cloud through a similar sort of simple set of APIs. So really bringing that connectivity all the way down to the edge and the products and devices themselves, which I think is pretty cool and exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's great to hear that, because one of the things that are discussed a lot on the show is this journey, from device to user and how that trickles down in the waterfall approach. So the fact that you got a series of APIs and these things are able to link together is so useful and beneficial, because great IoT devices and kind of deployments, unless they're connected and unless things work in harmony together, you don't get that synergy effect, and the adoption of that will be, of course, a lot less in the mainstream market. So it's really, really good to hear that. And I know recently you've launched the Twilio Microvisor. For those building an IoT device, obviously there's lots of capabilities around that. Could you go into a little bit more on that, Jonathan, for us?
Yeah, of course. So within Twilio IoT, we effectively have two sort of product lines today. So we have our our Super SIM product offering, which is a sort of multi-IMSI global SIM solution, so providing access to multiple networks globally for IoT devices, and we power things like the various micromobility companies, and all of those things where we're enabling the cellular connectivity through our multi-IMSI solution. And then on top of that, we acquired a company a few years ago that have been in the IoT space for a number of years called Electric Imp. And Electric Imp offer a sort of device builder platform approach, edge and cloud, end-to-end secure connectivity, to build the devices themselves. And what we're doing is we're really taking all of the IP from that Electric Imp acquisition and then creating a brand new approach to the edge devices themselves. And that is our Microvisor offering. And Microvisor essentially is a sort of hypervisor environment running on the edge that allows you as a developer to have access to all of the hardware, all of the real-time code that you want to run on the edge device itself, but effectively protected by that hypervisor or the microvisor, if you will, around that. So Microvisor itself enables real end-to-end security. So from the factory all the way through the manufacturing phase and into the real world, making sure that devices remain secure and are secure almost by design, which I think many devices kind of look to layer security in at the end of the development. I've been there myself as a software developer. You focus on the cool and sexy features first, and then at the end you worry about, well, how do I ensure this is secure? And really building on top of Microvisor, you get to build that in from the beginning, which I think is quite important. We then bring things like over-the-air firmware updates. So you want to effectively outsource all of those sort of boring but necessary components of your IoT device to us here at Twilio. And we manage that security, the managed connectivity, all of the firmware stacks, the IP stacks, everything that's running to provide the connectivity is now hidden behind a very simple Twilio API, and we're responsible for managing and maintaining all of those. So over-the-air updates, secure connectivity, and many other things. And one of the recent things that we demonstrated, which I think is really cool, is the ability to have remote debugging of your devices in the field. So in the way that you would connect a debugger locally on your desk and set breakpoints, stop the code, start the code, change things, and implement your code, we can now enable that exact same experience, but over the connectivity link, the connectivity bearer. So be that Wi-Fi or cellular. Let's say you've got a device that's not behaving properly in Guatemala. You now can go to that exact device and connect your debugger over the connectivity link and debug that device in real time on the other side of the world. And I think that, as a software engineer at heart, that is pretty exciting, right? And something that's never been done before.
Yeah, I mean it's great to hear. I mean, Saab Sembi, friend of the show and friend of the business, talks about if it's not safe, it's not smart, right? Exactly. And this whole process is really important because, as you say, from a software engineering perspective and from your background, you focus on the cool, sexy things first, and then look at the security as a sort of gold plating exercise.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a lot of people do, right? Because it's just natural. You want it to do what you want it to do first of all, and then the security comes afterwards. But it's the wrong way, and it's good to know that there's 100%. more and more businesses are focusing on this, right?
I completely agree, and that's where I think building on top of the the IP and the knowledge and the people that we have with the Electric Imp acquisition, security is kind of it's fundamental to us. It's in our DNA, if you will, and making sure that secure approach that, as I said, starts in the factory. Can you trust the factory to build the product and put the right code on there? Many products that launch today cannot say yes to that question, and I think that's quite a scary thing. If you can't trust the code that your device is running, then you can't trust the device, regardless of how many layers of security you've put on top of that. So building on top of a secure boot and a sort of a chain of trust for the application and the code running on the device itself, I think is in my mind that's a mandatory a must have when it comes to building devices. And we're working closely with ST Microelectronics and launching with the STM32U5, which has some of those hardware security features built in, and then we obviously provide the software security on top of that with the microvisor approach.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm filming this from Bristol, so I did a lot of work with SD Micro when they still had their office in Aztec West. So know the company really, really well, actually. So it's great. It's great to hear that you're using some of their chips and working with them, because I think from a secure aspect, a lot of obviously silicon vendors out there. Some of them obviously going through hard times at the moment in terms of shortages and what have you, but ST it has always been up there from a security point of view, so that's really, really good to know. I feel like I'm going to hijack this to talk about embedded stuff, but I think we should touch on that a little bit more. There's a lot of people from an embedded background who listen to the show, myself obviously included. What does this mean for embedded engineers using the Twilio Microvisor? Just a short summary. How can it improve and what they're doing?
Completely. So I think the most interesting things in the sort of IoT and IoT platforms that have kind of existed so far is that all of those platforms or the platform approaches, they're kind of asking the developer, the embedded engineer who's looking at integrating into one of these platforms, they're kind of asking you to kind of go all in a platform way of doing things. As I said, my experience as a software engineer and as an embedded developer is that generally you kind of want to own the code and you want to write that code yourself. So the ask to go all in on a platform and bend to the ways of the platform, I think is quite a big ask. And I think it's probably fair to say that's one of the reasons that many of these IoT platforms that have existed until now arguably haven't been that successful. So the thing that is really, really different with the microvisor approach is that we enable you as the developer to completely own your code running in the application space. You can use whatever operating system you want, be that a bare metal implementation on the chip itself, be that running on FreeRTOS, be that some homegrown OS you've got yourself, or anything you want to choose. Equally, you can write in any programming language. So, we will support obviously bindings for C++, but we're also looking at providing support for things like Rust and MicroPython and things going forwards. But essentially, the microvisor architecture enables you as the developer to write your application your way, in the way maybe you've been doing it for years and years, but now add in the microvisor features without having to change any of the ways that you write your code. And I think, compared to all of the other IoT platforms that are out there today, I think that makes the microvisor approach quite unique, because every other platform requires you to change your software, your architecture, your way of working to kind of bend to the ways of the platform. Whereas with microvisor, it just essentially wraps around your code, and then through that hypervisor approach provides the security and the trusted elements outside of that, almost completely separate to your code itself. So I think in terms of developer adoption and some of the feedback we're seeing so far, that is exactly what embedded engineers want. They kind of want to own their code, but then have the safety and security that microvisor brings off to one side, and I think that's quite unique.
Yeah, it is, frankly speaking, right, compared to what's out there in the market, but a really nice story to talk about the way things are going and the initiatives that Twilio are taking. I want to talk more about some of the use cases that Twilio are doing, actually, because I think it's important that people know. Recently, obviously, came across an article about Twilio IoT being used by bar analytics to measure such things like buying patterns, beer quality, etc. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that would be quite interesting.
Definitely. I think, and this really comes with our Super SIM, our cellular connectivity product that we've got. But I think when we first launched that platform, we probably, like everyone, expected things like transportation, logistic companies, or fleet tracking, asset tracking type use cases. And obviously, we've got lots of customers who are using us for those kind of things. But on top of that, we also have this company, yes, called Bar Analytics, that have actually embedded cellular connectivity into the beer taps that you see in pubs and bars. So that gives Bar Analytics real-time data in terms of usage and flow rates, temperatures, all of those kind of things. And they've actually, because of that, getting access to that real-time data running in the bars and restaurants around the world, that actually gives them the data they need to manage their business, which I think is pretty cool. And I think the benefit of cellular connectivity is quite an interesting one in that space, because you could think that, well, lots of those environments might have access to Wi-Fi or other types of connectivity, but actually providing that direct cellular connection, puts you as the device manufacturer in control of your connectivity. There's no reliance on the local networks. The challenges we see when local networking goes down and those kind of things. But also, because SuperSIM is a multi-IMSI solution, giving you access to multiple different networks in multiple different countries, then wherever those beer taps are deployed, if they're in a bar on the 15th floor of a skyscraper, or right down in the cellar somewhere, then because of the SuperSIM approach to allow you to select which network you have access to, then Bar Analytics can actually choose which networks give them the best network coverage, for each and every beer tap, if you like, which is pretty cool. So, it turns out, as well as providing connectivity for things like logistics, we're also providing connectivity for the Internet of Beer, which I think is a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a great story, right? Because I think ultimately throughout the pandemic, a lot of the use cases and a lot of the things that Twilio IoT must have been working on or thinking could be a solution, actually agile enough to start deploying solutions in different areas. Now, of course, obviously, beer being obviously restricted for such a long period of time with the closures of pubs and bars, etc. Now that's turning round, isn't it? It couldn't be more popular, especially having come out from the recent Euros, right? So I think the connectivity element and the wide adoption of various use cases is, and I always say, it's almost limitless, isn't it? It's just another example of where you can put a sensor, where you can put a cellular network or cellular device, and start using that. And it's absolutely fantastic to hear. And I'm always kind of pleasantly surprised and astounded by just yet another example of what we can do with IoT in general. And I think Internet of Beer is a great one. Definitely going to coin that. What else is going on with Twilio at the moment in terms of other use cases? Anything else that you want to share? Anything as cool as the Internet of Beer, Jonathan?
I think the beer one probably wins, but I was thinking of some of our other customers that we're working with at the moment. So I think of people like AirThinks that are doing air quality monitoring, which again is quite topical obviously at the moment, and also a company based here in the UK called FreeSpace that do occupancy sensors, so desk usage. And I think when we're all looking at the kind of return to the office aspects, then enabling the facilities managers to know how many people are using which desks, to be able to have dynamic cleaning schedules so that you can clean a desk when it's being used in preparation for the next person, and keep the sort of flow of people at the right rate for everyone as we return to the office is pretty cool. And there's an example where FreeSpace took our device builder platform and built effectively a new product for them in a matter of months to kind of address that market. And I think that, for me, really shows the sort of power of adopting or working with a platform approach as you build a product, right? Because all of those, as I said earlier, those sort of necessary or the boring components that you need to create a connected, secure device, you get to inherit all of those and then really focus on the cool, value add bits of your application. And that's exactly what FreeSpace have done in rolling out their latest product, which I think is pretty cool. Behind that, we're working with multiple companies across multiple different sectors, and I think we'll see a whole load of sort of both SuperSIM and Microvisor powered products come to market fairly shortly, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's fantastic to hear. I mean, I think you mentioned air quality. So we had Airthings recently on the podcast talking about obviously their sensors and air quality monitoring inside buildings and domestic settings. And I think the connectivity platform that you've got, and you talk about free space and being able to build on this, is opening up the amount of use cases, isn't it? It's opening up the amount of people that are able to bring something together. That combined with Microvisor, it's fantastic, and it's great to hear of a platform enabling people to do this without the rigmarole of having to set this up from the ground. And that's often been the blocker in the past. Is people have these great ideas and the vision to create something, but without the firm foundations, it's almost too much of a challenge. So it'd be lovely to follow Twilio IoT and some of the use cases that are going to come out in coming months and years, because yeah, I mean, crikey, there's going to be absolutely loads, isn't there? On that note, so for you personally, and I think you've done a fantastic job of obviously explaining Twilio IoT, etc. But what are the most exciting things that you believe are going to be built on some of these platforms, and where do you think the future is going with all of this?
I think that's a really interesting question. You know, for me personally, I think that kind of joining of this almost the voice of the customer and the way that when you have an app and a company that kind of knows all about you as a customer through your customer engagement is obviously something that Twilio are quite involved in today. I think extending that so that your habits and the data that's associated with you and the things that you do is not just the buttons that you click on a website or an application, but it now extends to the way that you use all of the products around you. I think is quite exciting, and almost the kind of the way that you use or interact with a company's products and services. I think that is the exciting thing that's really going to drive the sort of almost the next generation of customer engagement, and we like to think of that as almost the voice of the product kind of tells you more about the customer than the customer itself, because when you interact with the customer, maybe you do that through at a time of purchasing or when they interact with an app. But with the product, the customer will use that for many years beyond that. My robot Hoover, for example, goes off, 5 times a week, and being able to know that from the company that owns that, I think is quite exciting. And being able to then offer services layered on top of that is I think something that we're going to see more of, which is again pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on the show. Really appreciate your time and explaining in more depth what Twilio does. I think for our listeners and for me in particular, it's great to hear about some of these use cases and a little bit more about the technology that Twilio is creating. So we really appreciate you sharing that. For anyone that wants to follow up after this podcast and look online for other content, where's the best place for people to go out and find a bit more about Twilio?
Yeah, if you search online for Twilio IoT, that should take you to our top level page on the Twilio website, and from there you can learn more about both Microvisor and the SuperSIM connectivity offering. So, SuperSIMs are it's a GA product now, so you can order those SuperSIMs and get started straight away. And we've got many millions of devices out there using those SuperSIMs today. And with Microvisor, we are just launching now. There's the sort of private beta access to that, so you sign up to the private beta, and then can kind of join into the sort of internal review of that, and we'll obviously share all the code and all the documentation with you to get you up and running straight away. So yeah, come and join us at Twilio IoT. It's lots of exciting things happening.
Jonathan, thank you. Until next time, take care.
Cheers, Tom. Thanks very much.
And if you'd like to find out a bit more about Twilio, obviously follow the links and the content that Jonathan had kindly shared. And to get involved in the conversation, as usual, follow the hashtag the IoT podcast. Get involved in the comments, ask some questions. We're interested to know your thoughts. No suggestion is a bad suggestion. And we look forward to joining you on the next episode.